Okay, we'll show you every step involved in replacing and removing this front lock cylinder for the R171 SLK. That's removing it from the car, tracing it back to the pump, refilling the pump, and putting everything back into place. Important to say, this job needs to be done right, meaning get your part from Top Hydraulics because it has the proper seals inside the cylinder, even the new seals where the hose is going. There is no substitute for excellence. So let us show you every single step of the way here. To remove and replace the front lock cylinder, it's best to have the replacement cylinder in hand already. That helps you with the with the hose routing and getting everything done in one swoop. The tools you need are we're assuming you have removed the headliner already and propped the top panel up a little bit away from the windshield. We're having it about a foot away from the windshield for easier access to the hoses in the far corner of the top panel. For removal of the hoses on the pump, you'll see that later, you'll need a 3mm Allen wrench. For removal of the cylinder up here in the front lock mechanism, you need a Torx T30 wrench, a 6mm Allen wrench, and a small flat screwdriver. A handful of zip ties will be handy when you reroute the hoses as you install the new cylinder. So let's get started here. We want to first remove the two circlips on the 6mm pins that hold the front lock cylinder in this black front lock cylinder mount, put it that way. In order to get at the front circlip, you actually have to partially lock the front lock with your Allen wrench. You don't have to lock it all the way, but mostly lock it so that this pin is actually exposed. Now, let's get the small flat screwdriver. And this circlip is C-shaped. It has two small indentations towards the rear where you can get your small flat screwdriver in there. Now, my hands are going to be in the way a little bit if I do it the way I normally do it, but basically you want to make this a slow, controlled motion where you get your screwdriver into the gap, and if you move slowly and your fingers are there to catch it, you're not going to lose this little circlip. Let's put it in a safe place. For me, that's on the floor mat right now. Next step is I push this pin in towards the top panel with a tool. No worry, you're not going to bend anything. The top panel is double layered there. We're pushing this up because it's easiest to push this pin up now while the lock assembly is still fastened. Now let's do the same thing in the rear here. Find a gap in the circlip, slowly squeeze it, turn the screwdriver to get this circlip out. I just don't want to get my hands in the way of the camera, that's why it looks a little awkward. And again, we push this pin up a little bit. Now, next step is loosening the three Torx bolts here. That takes a Torx T30. Don't worry, they will stay attached to the latch, so they're not going to fall out. Number one. 2. And 3. Now you have this front lock assembly coming down on you. The upper pin that we pushed up before, we can now pull out. You see it has a little goop on top, black RTV that is just supposed to prevent it from rattling we have this pin out. It's an, I believe, M6 by 12 millimeters. Don't lose it. So here we have part of the front lock cylinder freed up. Now we grab the rear mounting pin, pull it out. Looks like an 6 by 25 or so millimeters. And again, that is fully reusable. Now the trick here is, you see how there's a little dent in this housing that actually pushes on the cylinder aluminum housing to keep the whole thing from rattling. So as we try to pull this old cylinder out, we kind of work around this dent, and that makes everything pretty easy. Here's our leaking old cylinder, and I'll let this dangle down now and replace it with the far superior new cylinder from Top Hydraulics. You've seen our presentation on that before, with the upgraded cup seal that lasts a whole lot longer than the original, upgraded piston seal, and both upgraded port seals. Now push this back in here. Here we go. We want to put the rear pin in already. That's quite easy right now. There's the pin. I may as well fasten the circlip already. This one actually was easy enough to push on with my finger. Typically, you have to give it a little push with your screwdriver. Now, as you put this cylinder in completely, you want to make sure that the rounded open end of this yoke is actually facing the rotating mechanism here in this latch, or facing the part that your 6 millimeter Allen wrench goes into. Now you want to line up the two parts of the latch that are combined here, that then will have the cylinder's yoke or rod end around it and the pin going through it. So now I just need to push my shaft in far enough exactly to line up here, and just to make my job a little easier, I'll put this wrench through here and wiggle a little bit to line these parts up just right. And if I line them up well enough, then my pin will go through here nicely. Now that does take a little bit of wiggling parts around, and not too bad. Now it's through all the way. And we put our circlip back on. Can my finger push it? No, not this one. So I have the circlip partially seated, and I just push it on there, and there it is in place. Now, one very important part is, you notice how these Torx T30 bolts are actually in slotted holes. That is for the alignment of the front lock. Notice that the rear bolt here does not slide, but the two front bolts do. So if this lock gets installed slightly out of whack, then one of these arms will close more than the other one, and you don't get the proper signals from the micro switches, which in the end will make the top not want to retract after the front has unlocked here, because the computer doesn't get the signal, possibly, that the lock is fully open. So I will show you now how to properly align this front lock, and it's surprisingly easy. So let's partially fasten the rear bolt first, then the two front bolts. Get each bolt into position first. Now you can see, have them closed, torqued down almost all the way, back out a turn, closed all the way, back out a turn. The rear one wasn't fastened yet, so this whole lock can still shift around. Now we take out our support for the top and we let the top come down into the windshield header. The important part is to support the top panel in the rear so that actually these plastic pins will go into their proper spot. Now the one thing I forgot before I did this was I did not open the lock all the way first. So I will back up a little bit and open this lock completely by turning it clockwise as far as I can with my 6mm Allen wrench. Now we let the top drop into the windshield header. We lock. And now that the lock is completely fastened or closed, we fasten our Torx bolts. And this actually lines up the front lock properly. If you had a problem with the front lock alignment and you didn't see this part in the video before, then you would actually first partially unlock with the 6mm Allen bolt that I just dropped. First partially unlock while the bolts are loose, then you would lock again and fasten the bolts and the front lock would be aligned. So next step, we scoot the top back a foot again and go about routing these hoses, taking out the old ones and putting the new ones in place while we're at it. So next we route the hoses back to the pump, meaning take the old hoses out, and if you have your replacement, as we do here in hand already, you can put the new hoses in place at the same time. It's pretty straightforward. You need a little wire cutter or flush cutter and about a dozen small zip ties. We will follow these hoses all the way back to the pump. We'll show you a few zipped hose replacement steps here with replacing the zip ties, but I don't think we need to show you every single one. So let's do a few here. We have the junction where the micro switch wire is joining the hoses here, and we just put the same clip back on that later on goes into the top panel, and have our first zip tie to be cut here, and we just put on the new zip tie. I'm not going to tie all these tight yet, just to get the routing right first, and then later on I would be pulling this tight. If you have a fancy tool, great. I just use a little flush cutter here to make it look good, and we keep going one after another. Replace this zip tie and keep going this way until we get to the pump. Mostly for reference, so you don't have to take a bunch of photos in case you weren't sure about the hose routing. The hoses go along the top panel, down the side here, turn around at the very bottom, and note that they route up to be above the main lift cylinder, are joining a couple electrical wires here zip tied to the tops frame, coming down to run in front of the main lift cylinder, and then making a 90-degree jog over here to join a harness of more hoses going over to the pump. It may look intimidating, but it's totally simple. After we have this felt pulled apart, you'll see how the hoses go into the pump, and under the pump then are hose retaining plates that you undo with a 3mm Allen wrench. Pull the hose out, pull the old hose out, put the new hose back in.